Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon. I'm the Dean of Graduate Research at Flinders University, and welcome to Vlog 215, Disappointment. If we live with disappointment. So that journal article that you wanted to get published got rejected. That wonderful lecture that you spent all the time preparing, wow, was a bit of a disaster. And yes, that chapter that you worked so hard on to present to your supervisor in your PhD, he or she thought was pretty mediocre. Ouch. And of course, life is set up to leave us feeling pretty disappointed. You know, for example, we read fairy tales as a child. Lovely. And yet, how sad is it in life we never get to frock up and go to the ball. We are disappointed. And you know, we wanted to be that great sports person. You know, you wanted to be a great cricketer. And then of course you were just pretty poor at cricket and you never really even got into the B grade. And yes, in research, we wanted that experiment, we wanted that field work to be revelatory and magnificent and incisive. And of course we went out into the field and then like people didn't behave like we thought they should, and it was, yes, disappointing. So disappointment has a series of moving parts that we're going to talk about today, because disappointment always commences with expectations. You've got an expectation and then something external to you intervenes, and therefore what you hoped would happen, what your expectations promised you, didn't emerge, and you were, yes, disappointed. So we build up hope in life that a positive result will occur for us, and then of course an alternative reality emerges and we just can't seem to manage it. So for those who struggle with anxiety and depression, what happens at this point is an all or nothing approach. So it's not what I hoped it would be, therefore it's a disaster, right? So life is configured through extremes. Wow, this is fabulous. Or wow, this is an absolute shambles, a mess, a disgrace. But of course life, let alone our universities, rarely presents its events in such stark terms. Mostly disasters don't happen on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis, but of course neither is life fabulous on a daily, weekly or monthly basis. Mostly things are sort of okay. You never get your dream job, never. And you'll never maybe be in permanent work. That's the nature of higher education right now. Maybe you'll never have a permanent job. So what's probably going to happen is all of us will be in jobs that are sort of okay most of the time. And your publishing career will show some great moments and also some absolute shockers. And you'll work with some truly great colleagues and some really, really dreadful people. So therefore, what is disappointment? What is disappointment? Disappointment is the narrative of your life that you thought would happen has not. So generalizations emerge in disappointment. And what I mean by that is, so one bad thing happens. So you receive an email from someone who's really going for you, or a student after a lecture was incredibly rude to you, right? So one event happens, and what happens in a disappointment zone is you generalize that singular disappointment into greater and more significant matters in your life. So a disappointing email becomes a disappointing day, becomes a disappointing week, becomes a disappointing job. Yep. And therefore there are lots of strategies that we can deploy to manage disappointment. And one that we see quite frequently in doctoral education is when a student, to manage disappointment, doesn't try too hard, right? So underachievement is a strategy to avoid disappointment. We see it in students all the time. So a student didn't do too well, and we ask them, right, well, what's happening? And, oh, look, I didn't try too hard. So they're avoiding success by avoiding disappointment, okay? So the imperative when we're thinking about disappointment is to create balance in our developmental history. Not huge successes and catastrophic failures, but big highs, big lows, they won't get you home, okay? What we need in a PhD is to have a plan, have developmental goals. And those developmental goals move you forward with stability. So with this continuity, with this calm development in place, when disappointments emerge for you, and they will, a disappointment will be understood in a context. So failing doesn't make you a failure. And particularly today, I want to talk about academic publishing, because it is a site of incredible and frequent disappointment, right? So to get published demands, it necessitates the management of disappointment every single day. So when you are in a PhD program and you're starting to publish, you're going to get knocked back a lot, okay? Because what you're doing in a PhD program is you're learning about the standards of academic life. So say you come from honours or a master's degree, you don't really know the standards that are required in academic publishing, okay? You've heard me say so often in these vlogs, PhD students don't know what they don't know. And what I mean by that is, why the PhD program is so hard is you really don't know what the next step is, because in a PhD program you only do, most people only do a PhD once, so you've got no idea what this actually looks like. And of course that's a confronting truth, to know what you don't know. And academic publishing is a tough genre, and high standards are required, and yes, it is incredibly unpredictable. So in a PhD, you're just trying to work out what the benchmark or what the standards are in publishing. And that means for basically much of your doctorate, publishing is going to be a disappointment. And you need to get published. You need to get published. You will not get an academic job without being published. And see, I'm not talking about 1 or 2 or 3 articles during a candidature. If you want a job, I'm talking about 10, 12, 15 articles. So publish early, publish often. But know that at least half the time, and to be frank with you, much more frequently earlier on in your career, your article is going to be rejected. Bang. And please note, you're not being rejected. The article's being rejected. You must separate them. And publishing is the punctuation of academic life. So disappointment with academic publishing is a constant companion. And sometimes, maybe quite often, those rejections are going to be unfair. Full stop. An early rejection from one referee for one of my articles, I think it was in 2002, so a long time ago, an early rejection from one of my articles on football, association football, soccer. So I wanted to get into this journal, not a great journal, can I say, an Australian journal, we learned a lot there. So I was actually just offering an article, seeing how it would go, and the referee report replied, one line, women should not write on football. Full stop. Women should not write on football. That was the referee report. And that's disappointing. But it's also real. You need to come to every publishing moment with the expectation of rejection. And from there, disappointment can be managed. And look, the feeling when that first acceptance comes in, and the second, and the fifth, and the 10th, and the 200th is just incredible. And look, I think I'm at what, about 205, 206 refereed articles and book chapters, and it is still exciting. So I'm not going to play with this or minimise this. When that acceptance arrives, even now as an old person, it's like, oh yes, it's amazing. It is amazing. So I'm not going to minimise that. But that, of course, is why the disappointment is so brutalising, because the success feels so fabulous. So publishing is really bumpy. And if you can treat every rejection, and this is hard, if you can treat every rejection as getting you closer to publication, and to do that you have to look at the referee reports, take the emotion out, and some of it will be quite volatile, and see if they're offering you a commentary that does actually improve the article. And if they do, grab it, improve the article, go again, go again. So you will get published if you are even, focused, and clear. Now, if you feel disappointment, that's okay. It's a comma state, remember, in the comma series. So if you feel disappointment, treat it like a comma. Sit in it for a moment and try and make sure that it doesn't bleed, particularly bleed into bitterness or anger or resentment. And this is what Carol Dweck has described as mindset. I found this really important research, mindset. And she described the value of moving into a growth mindset rather than what she described as a fixed mindset. So Dweck argues that a fixed mindset focuses on how you are judged by others. That's a fixed mindset. Other people, how they judge you. A growth mindset focuses on improvement. So now that we've got that mindset structure in place and thinking about the growth mindset, let me finish off with the 5 strategies to treat disappointment as a comma in your professional life rather than a full stop. Here we go. Strategy 1, construct clear goals. Do not confuse expectations and goals. Make the goals small enough so that you can see them, you can understand them, they are bounded, and therefore you can create the small steps, a plan, if you will, to get to that goal. Disappointment emerges because PhD students and the rest of us set up expectations that are not remotely connected to the gritty reality of life. And particularly, can I say, the gritty reality of our contemporary university. So the first strategy is to recognise that your expectations, your hope for what may happen is probably not real or gritty or even possible. Secondly, instead of expectations, configure those goals and then the strategies to work towards them. So the advantage of this system is that you are contextualizing your goals. Your goals are within a gritty context rather than what you hope will happen, right? So the students that I find the most difficult to be of assistance to in the office are the ones that have, a version of what they think life should be like. And they're so disconnected from the reality of life and the reality of international higher education that I just can't help them. They're clinging on to that particular version of life as they would like it to be. And it's not like that, and it will never be like that. And I just can't help them. Disappointment is a full stop for them, not a comma. Therefore, find a way to get yourself out of the gonna, coulda, shoulda, gonna do it, coulda, done it, shoulda done it. Get out of that. What is your goal? What are your steps to reach that goal? Then, of course, from that point, disappointment sort of dissipates because your goals are grounded in a context. and you have a plan. 2, biggie. Gee, these are big. 2, ask yourself what success looks like. Establish your definition of what success is. Now, this is important, not other people's definition of what they think success is for you. Because disappointment emerges every single time if you live the life that other people think you should live. And particularly we're talking about parents. Most of our parents had a clear narrative about what our life would be like. And the earlier you can disconnect from that narrative, the happier you will be. But you know, your kids might have a narrative for you, your partner might have a narrative for you, and that leads to disappointment. It's important to be very clear about what success is, particularly before you start a PhD, but also through the PhD. Make sure that's a fresh and living document. What is success for you today? And can I say, for really old people like me, at least once a year, often once a month at the moment, my goodness me, I'm asking myself, what does success look like for me? Now, for you it might be, you know, a particularly great set of teaching reviews or an improving teaching review. That's great. It could be a number of articles for this particular year. It may be exercising every day. You may want to do 15 minutes of meditation every day. So what you need to do therefore is stop and think about, what does success look like for me today? And of course what you then do is flesh out that narrative of success and then return to it and update it regularly. 3, sit in your feelings. Sit in the disappointment and move yourself to learning as quickly as you can. So importantly, and this is crucial really, it changed my life when I read this, grief and disappointment are cousins. So disappointment is a loss. It's a loss of a hope, of a dream, of an aspiration. It is a loss, and that's why it hurts. So it is the loss of a narrative, a version of your life that you thought you would live. Well, so it is important that you sit in those feelings and you acknowledge the loss. But as with all modes of grief, you are going to require a strategy to get out of it, to continue living even if you don't want to. And time doesn't heal. That cliche is wrong. Time doesn't heal. But what time does do is it recontextualizes your current reality. Okay, so something really disappointing happened to you today, and I'm sorry for that. So you need to sit in that disappointment. Sit in it. Acknowledge the disappointment, but then ask yourself one question. How will I feel about this moment in 3 years' time? So this disappointment seems like your entire world today. You just keep on bouncing into it. Oh, this hurts. Oh, this really hurts. And I get that. And you need to sit in that, but then ask yourself, in 3 years' time, how will I handle this disappointment? And of course, what happens is you've just loaned that disappointment a new context and a new perspective. And look, it may just provide the rationale for you to understand your pit of hell today, but know that you can get out of it. So therefore, on that disappointing day, be kind to yourself. Go for a walk, listen to music, watch a film, activate distraction or displacing techniques, at least for a couple of hours, because what you're doing is you're trying to get all these very raw emotions back into your body. And remember, you've overcome disappointments before. You can do it again today. 4. What did you learn from the disappointment? This is a tough one. It was a tough one for me to write because, as you know, I'm not a sort of every cloud has a silver lining type of person. I'm an old goth, so I know life's disappointing and then you die. I know that. But of course this is the comma series, not the full stop series. And disappointment must never be a full stop. And look, I've met plenty of students where disappointment is a full stop. They're disappointed with me, they're disappointed with the university, they're disappointed with the journal, they're disappointed with their supervisor, they're disappointed with their parents, they're disappointed with their partner. Disappointed. Disappointed. And I can't get them out of it. So they just sit in the disappointment and they attrit. They leave the program. They can't get out of the disappointment. And they haven't learnt one lesson. And that lesson is disappointment at its best has a partner. And that partner is persistence. So let me just tell you one story about disappointment, persistence, and flexibility. Now, I was trying to get my 5th book published. It was an important moment in my life. My first 4 books had been published with Australian university presses. And I had had enough of this. I'd had enough of having this sort of Australian audience. You know, I have a lot of issues with Australian cultural studies and the Australian humanities, can I be honest with you? And I wanted a different vista for myself. I wanted an international audience, and Australian university presses were not getting it. So I wanted to, in my 5th book, try and jump to an international audience. And this became, by the way, my book, From Revolution to Revelation. Now, think about it. I was a young person. I was in Perth in Western Australia as a humble senior lecturer. So I was in a nobody university, in a nobody town, a very, very junior staff member and a woman. So it was all happening. Everything was working against me. But I didn't know it was a good book. I just had to find a publisher who would recognise it. Now, here we go. I received 23 rejection letters from international university presses. 23. And then I finally took a breath and I said, right, what's going on here? And I realised I'd sent it to international university presses, and all of the editors had made a decision as an editor. They hadn't sent it to any referees. They just went, here's some bird from some town, here's a nobody, I won't even bother sending it to referees. Okay, so it was just an instant rejection from the editor. And then I went, okay, well, I've got to do something different. And you know what? After 23 rejections, how about I go to what I think of as the best publisher in the world? You know, I've been too scared to go to Ashgate. Ashgate was the publisher that transformed international cultural studies. Edgy, powerful, provocative. I would argue the 10 best books ever written in cultural studies happened from Ashgate. Whew. And I went, okay, 23, what have I got to lose? I'm going to send it to Ashgate. And I had no faith that it was going to be okay, because I had evidence that it was not going to be okay. 23 rejection letters. But also, I did know that this book was good, and that's the problem. And I knew desperately that I wanted to get beyond this tiny little pool of people in Australia. I wanted a different life for myself. And unbelievably, the commissioning editor of Ashgate, Caroline Winterskill, picked this manuscript out of the hundreds of manuscripts she receives, picked it out, liked it, sent it out to referees finally, and published it within 6 months. This became the first book that I published outside of Australia. 15 books would follow, and I have never and will never publish in an Australian and with an Australian publisher ever again. And why this mattered so much is this single book was a pivot for my entire career. Caroline would go on to be the editor of 3 other books for me, for Ashgate, The University of Google, and when I die, by the way, it's going to be Tara Brabazon, author of The University of Google. I know that, however many books I publish. Digital Dieting, and Thinking Pop. These books made my career. They made my career. I was able to go to Britain as a full professor, to hold a chair in the United Kingdom, because I'd published in the United Kingdom and internationally. This woman changed my life. This woman changed my entire life. If this hadn't happened, my career would have ended. I'd still be in West Australia doing something bizarre, right? That's how important this was. Now then, of course, when Caroline moved to Manchester University Press, and this is where the story becomes even more poignant and moving, and Steve, my beloved late husband Steve Redhead, died, and she'd moved to Manchester University Press, Caroline made a decision to publish in a second edition Steve's book, The End of the Century Party, with me writing, I think it's a 24,000 word prologue to introduce it for new readers. Now, I've told you that story, not that it's a model of anything in particular, not that it's an example of anything, but what it maybe does show to you perhaps is that managing disappointment is probably the most important academic skill. People, students, colleagues, members of the public do weird stuff with academics. They abuse us pretty well on a daily basis. At least once a day, I get an absolutely bizarre, abusive message from some member of the public that would like to overshare with me, okay? And they're rude, they're nasty, they're name-calling, disrespectful of the nature of academic life, and that happens on a daily basis. Happens to you, a tute or a lab, you prepped it beautifully, it was an absolute disaster. The chapter that you worked so hard on just didn't really hold together, it's not really working. And that article that you loved so much got rejected. Wow. And you go, yep, that really hurts, that hurts. So absolutely, feel the disappointment, you need to, feel it. We'd all like life to go well, to be happy, to be smooth, to be like a wave, just lovely. And life is never that. It has never happened, it will never happen. The trick, the life hack, if you will, that so few people talk about is treating disappointment like a comma. Perspective shrinks disappointments. So dust yourself off and go again. Imagine if I had given up at rejection 22, or rejection 12, or rejection 2. This book, which a lot of my colleagues still think of as my best book, still gets hundreds of citations, does incredibly well. The rest of my life wouldn't have happened if that book hadn't occurred. I would never have been published in the UK, I would never have got a British professorship, and that relationship with that incredible editor would never have been formed. And that woman changed my life. So never underestimate these powerful relationships with editors. A great editor can become a great friend, and they can change your life, change your life. And if I hadn't met Caroline, my life would have been so much sadder and harder and nastier. So treating life like a really, really, really challenging yoga class might be useful, because every now and again it's like disappointment. You're going to be in a stretch that actually hurts you a bit. You go, ow, oh, ow, oh, not nice, ow, ow, ow. But through disappointment, your flexibility does grow. And the gap between your expectations and your goals starts to reduce. Yeah. And you start to learn to take the knockback, not with anger, with calmness, and then you just get up and you go again. And that's the moment where disappointment becomes a comma and not a full stop. If disappointment happens and you don't use it to reassess your life goals, your motivations, what you're doing here, then a version of you will end at that point. But if you treat it like a comma, something remarkable will happen, which leads to 5. Use disappointments to develop your flexibility. Disappointments emerge from people who have a fixed version of how their life could be, and indeed should be. And of course that's not life, that's a fairy tale. That's not life, that's a coke ad, right? The workplaces at the moment, let alone in our universities or beyond it, these are tough places. These are hard places, right? Life is going to continue to be cold, brutalizing, nasty, tough. And most people live in disappointment most of the time. But rigidity in expectations is not a way to manage uncertainty. The best way to manage uncertainty is adaptability and flexibility. Confidence in handling change. So look, all of us, we can sit in disappointment indefinitely. It is a full stop state. It can fester into anxiety and into depression. It can blur with anger and rage, and then some really bad stuff happens. And it can also stop your career, stop publications, stop your relationship, and indeed stop your life. The best way out of disappointment, that also happens to be the hardest, is to sit in it, take a breath, and treat it like a life comma. So after that life comma, ask yourself, what did I learn here? What did I learn? Now, that is probably the most powerful life question. And I know all the sort of mentoring and life coaching and all this stuff, blah, 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 blah. Really, all of it boils down to asking a singular question of yourself. From disappointment, what did I learn here? Now, this is a tough question. Why it's so tough, why people don't want to ask it, is that because it can shatter, it can break the entirety, the foundation of your identity. So what did I learn? I learned that I need to work harder. What did I learn? I need to be more precise in the configuration of my goals. What did I learn? I need to stop blaming other people for my decisions. What did I learn? I need to stop hoping that it'll be okay and make decisions to make it okay. Because disappointment is not an emotion. Disappointment is a decision. Disappointment is not pleasant, but it's also not permanent, unless you want it to be so. If you make a decision to stay in disappointment, then it will be the marinade for your entire life, and it will be a full stop state. But if you can treat disappointment like a comma, it becomes a gateway to an alternative trajectory, an alternative reality for your life and also for your career. From a windy Adelaide, I wish you love, light and peace. Tea out.